This is anonymous. Before you listen any further, understand who is speaking. We are not a political party. We are not a campaign. We are not here to protect power, polish it, or excuse it. We exist to preserve memory in a system that depends on forgetting. And what you are about to hear is not a rumor mill. It is a stitched-together record of court rulings, public reporting, official statements, and the pattern underneath them. Tonight's message is simple. Anonymous reveals the dark side of ICE under Trump. And no, the dark side isn't just what happens at the border. It's what happens to the rule of law, when Trump decides the law is optional, when he treats institutions like props, when he installs loyalists, breaks procedures, and then screams, bias, when judges refuse to play along. Because, when the rule of law collapses in one corner of the federal system, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads, it infects prosecutions, it infects deportations, it infects detention, it infects ICE. Start here. A federal judge in Virginia just excoriated the Trump DOJ in open court during an appearance where the judge essentially said, "Why the hell is Lindsay Halligan, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, still calling herself that when we fired her? She's done. She's gone. She's no longer the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. So get her off the pleadings. Stop pretending that she's the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia." Multiple reports describe judges striking her name from filings and calling it unacceptable that she's still being listed. Then the judge drilled down even harder. Why, after she was disqualified by a prior judge, Judge Curry in the Comey case, why is she still showing up in records and representing she's the U.S. Attorney? The target of the judge's frustration wasn't some TV lawyer doing theatrics. It was aimed at a line federal prosecutor, one of the day-to-day assistants doing the actual work, standing there and basically admitting, "We're being forced to do it." Forced by who? They said they were being told by the Department of Justice and the Office of Legal Counsel to keep her name on the paperwork. She's our boss, so we don't really have an option. And Judge Leonie Brinkema's warning cuts to the core. After rulings across the country, after courts step in and say a person is unlawfully serving, you don't get to keep a pretend U.S. attorney in place like a cardboard cutout and expect the rest of the system not to rot. Because this isn't theater. These signatures touch real indictments, real arrests, real pleas, real prison time. And that brings us to ICE. Because in Trump's America, the same DOJ culture that tries to keep an unlawfully installed prosecutor on filings is the culture that supercharges immigration enforcement, expands detention, ramps up deportation flights, and pushes a punishment-first machine, then calls anyone who resists rogue. And when the system is already willing to treat legal limits like suggestions, immigrants become the easiest target. The least protected, the most disposable. Now watch what the top of Trump's DOJ did next. Instead of fixing the problem, removing the name, letting competent career staff run cases properly, they issued one of the strangest official statements you will ever read from the Department of Justice. Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche declared that certain district court and magistrate judges in the Eastern District of Virginia are engaging in an unconscionable campaign of bias and hostility against Halligan and her line prosecutors. They framed it as, "The judges are picking on us." They said these prosecutors are simply doing their jobs, advocating for DOJ positions while following OLC guidance, and they warned they have no tolerance for undemocratic judicial activism, promising they will not be deterred by rogue judges with political views. They ended it with a flourish about what the American people deserve. Read that again. When judges insist the government follow the Constitution, Trump's DOJ calls it undemocratic. When courts demand lawful appointments, they call it activism. When a judge asks why a disqualified official is still being treated as legitimate, they call it bias and hostility. That is not law enforcement. That is propaganda with a badge. And the facts underneath this aren't partisan opinions. They are the structure of the Constitution. United States attorneys are officers who are supposed to be nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. And Congress passed a statute allowing a temporary interim appointment for 120 days, with the possibility that district judges can extend or appoint someone if the clock runs out. In the Virginia fight over Halligan, Judge Curry concluded Halligan had no lawful authority, and that her actions presenting indictments were unlawful and ineffective, dismissing the Comey and Letitia James indictments without prejudice. And the timeline matters. After U.S. Attorney Jessica Aber resigned, Eric Siebert served as interim. When the clock ran out, the judges extended him, meaning the Attorney General's 120-day appointment authority had expired, and the power sat with the judges unless and until the President nominates, and the Senate confirms. Then, after pressure, Siebert resigned, and Bondi appointed Halligan anyway under the same interim framework, exactly the maneuver Judge Curry rejected. Now pause. Ask yourself what kind of system this is becoming. A system where Trump can pressure out a prosecutor who won't chase his enemies. A system where the DOJ responds by installing someone else anyway, even when the appointment rules don't allow it. A system where, when judges intervene, DOJ leadership doesn't correct course, it attacks the judges. And what was Halligan doing during all of this? She was the hand-picked Trump-aligned choice, tied to an effort to prosecute former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Judge Curry ruled the indictments invalid because Halligan lacked authority. But the Comey case didn't just collapse on appointment authority. It was also drenched in procedural chaos. Reports described a disturbing pattern of investigative missteps and a court order requiring prosecutors to turn over grand jury materials, including criticism that statements were made that harmed Comey's rights. Another report described a federal judge pressing prosecutors on an extraordinary admission. The operative version of the Comey indictment was never shown to the entire grand jury or presented in the grand jury room. And there was reporting that the government used an FBI agent who had been exposed to potentially privileged materials, and that same agent went into the grand jury and testified anyway. So when you hear people describe it like this, confusion about what the grand jury saw, the government scrambling afterward, understand, you're not hearing political rhetoric, you're watching a legal system flashing red warning lights. And then, even after courts ruled the appointment unlawful and indictments were thrown out, DOJ leadership kept pushing this surreal posture. Keep the name on filings. Keep pretending. Keep daring courts to stop you. There was reporting that the Office of Legal Counsel advised that Halligan continue to be listed on court filings, even after Judge Curry's ruling declared her unlawfully installed. One reason this fight escalated into open conflict between judges and DOJ leadership. Now bring in the parallel case that exposes the template. New Jersey. Alina Habba, another Trump ally, stayed beyond the 120-day window. Judges did not extend it, and courts rejected the idea that she could cling to the office by maneuvering around the statute. Reporting described her resignation, after appellate court action, and the dispute, as part of a broader clash over installing close Trump allies without Senate confirmation. So the pattern is real, not hypothetical. Real courts, real rulings, real consequences. And the question Judge Brinkema raised is deadly serious. If you keep attaching the name of an unlawful official to prosecutions, how many cases do you taint? How many defendants get appeal routes? How much public safety do you jeopardize just to satisfy Trump's ego and vengeance? And now, ICE. Because when Trump's circle treats the Justice Department like a personal weapon, ICE does not operate in a vacuum. ICE is the enforcement arm that becomes louder, harsher, faster, and more punitive when the White House decides cruelty is policy. And Trump has never hidden his belief that fear is governance. We have already seen what happens when DOJ and DHS coordinate punitive immigration strategies under Trump. The zero-tolerance policy for illegal border crossing was implemented in 2018 and helped create the family separation crisis. An Inspector General report later concluded DOJ leadership did not effectively coordinate with agencies and stakeholders before implementing the policy shift that drove family separations, while also describing DOJ leadership, particularly the Office of the Attorney General, as a driving force urging DHS toward that prosecutorial approach. That is what the dark side looks like. Bureaucratic muscle used to punish, not to protect. Rules bent, then snapped. Chaos introduced, then denied. Detention is the other half of the machine. Oversight reports on ICE detention facilities have identified violations of detention standards and raised concerns about the environment where detainees were held. And later oversight has continued to note persistent deficiencies across detention inspections, including issues tied to medical care, safety, and sanitation. Now fast forward to what is being reported in Trump's new era of escalation. There has been reporting about expanded militarized zones along the southern border, transferring jurisdiction of swaths of land to the U.S. Navy, deploying troops, and enabling new criminal penalties tied to trespassing on military land, raising constitutional concerns. There has also been reporting about new or expanded aviation contracts supporting deportation operations, and concerns about transparency and who is being swept into the machinery, including children on deportation flights. And there has been local pushback too, including an ordinance described as restricting the use of county property for ICE enforcement staging. So when you hear a judge in Virginia rage about a pretend U.S. attorney, do not treat it as a niche legal story. It is a symptom, a signal. The same contempt for limits that produces unlawful prosecutorial power plays is the contempt that fuels mass enforcement schemes, where ICE becomes the instrument. And that is why this matters. Because the DOJ is supposed to be the institution that keeps law enforcement lawful. It is supposed to restrain power, not unleash it. But under Trump, the pattern that emerges again and again is this. Loyalty is rewarded, competence is optional, and legality is negotiated after the fact. And insiders have framed it the way it feels. Judges who spent careers in and around DOJ are watching the fall of a once proud institution. Not a partisan fall. An institutional fall. A humiliation. A stain. They warn what any serious lawyer should fear. If a person is a legal nullity in a role, if courts say she does not have lawful authority, then every case with her name attached becomes vulnerable. Not just the splashy political cases. The bread and butter cases. The cases about drugs, fraud, espionage, trafficking. And if you sabotage those prosecutions for political theater, you do not just undermine opponents, you undermine public safety itself. Then comes the metaphor that nails the madness. Imagine you are at a baseball game with your family, and a streaker runs onto the field. The first time, people are shocked, maybe even amused. But then the streaker keeps coming back, disrupting the game, stealing the ball, throwing bases around, ruining everything. And all that person had to do was stay in the stands, watch like everyone else. That is what this has become. After a judge disqualifies an interim U.S. attorney, after a court says the appointment is unlawful, the DOJ could preserve the status quo by doing almost nothing. Stop putting the name on pleadings. Let the office function under legitimate supervision, and move on. But they refuse. They insist on keeping the name on filings. They insist on acting like the court did not speak. They insist on provoking a showdown, not because it helps the public, but because Trump wants dominance and revenge. And this is where the dark side becomes plain. A government that treats judges as enemies when judges insist on the Constitution is a government preparing itself to abuse power everywhere else, including immigration. Especially immigration, because immigrants are the easiest people to dehumanize in propaganda. They are the easiest people to hold in remote detention, the easiest people to move in quiet planes, the easiest people to target with public safety slogans while the machinery grinds them down behind fences and paperwork. So when Trump's DOJ says, "We will not be deterred," when it calls judges rogue, when it claims courts are biased for demanding lawful appointments, remember what that posture enables. It enables a system where legality becomes optional. An optional constitution is how you get family separation rationalized as policy. It is how you get detention conditions repeatedly flagged by inspectors and still treated as background noise. It is how you get militarized zones at the border and new criminal penalties tied to military land with constitutional alarms ringing in the background. It is how you get deportation infrastructure expanding while transparency and accountability questions multiply. And it is how you get a Justice Department that looks at the law and says, in effect, the law is against us, therefore the law must be political. No, the law is not political because it restrains Trump. Trump is political because he refuses restraint. And the most dangerous part is this. The people caught in the gears are not just high-profile targets like Comey or Letitia James. It is also ordinary defendants, ordinary families, ordinary immigrants, people who never asked to become symbols in Trump's war against the idea of limits. So here is what you do with this information. You do not let it fade. You do not let it become just another headline. You do not let them normalize a world where judges have to physically strike names from filings because the executive branch refuses to accept the concept of unlawful power. You document it. You share it. You speak about it. You vote like it matters. You support organizations that litigate when the machine breaks the rules. You demand oversight. You demand inspections. You demand hearings. You demand that public safety stop being used as a blanket excuse for lawless cruelty. Because the dark side of ICE under Trump is not one policy. It is the philosophy that power can do what it wants, and that anyone who stops it is the enemy. This is anonymous. If you want more of these breakdowns, if you want the receipts connected, the timelines tracked, and the propaganda stripped away, then like this video, subscribe, share it with someone who still thinks it cannot happen here, and keep your eyes open. We do not forgive, we do not forget.